Polls are designed to capture public opinion, and they do it with questions. But not all questions are created equal. Ask a question one way, and you'll get one response. Ask it maybe a slightly different way, and you'll get a totally different response, which makes writing questions really, really important in polling. And therein lies the rub. What happens when a bunch of big, reputable names are attached to a poll with some very questionable questions? This time on Poll Hub, it's all in the wording. Let's get started. And hello, everybody. I'm J.D. Dapper. Oh, Director of Innovation at the Marist Poll.
Yes, welcome. Congratulations.
You did so well up until this point. We thought we'd keep you around for a while.
I'm not just the host anymore. That's good. Thanks.
Okay, very good. I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion, and
I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll, and we are here on the Marist College campus in the Hancock Center in Poughkeepsie, New York.
It's always fascinated me, especially when I was a political reporter, to look at polls and look at results. And then when I had time, which wasn't all that often, to dig through the sheets of paper that you guys used to send over or fax over in those days with all of the questions and how they were asked. And most of the time it's pretty straightforward. Do you, for president, do you favor, and you list names. But on issues, there were so often times when I would look at the questions and go, wow, that they had to really craft that so that it would be impartial.
And it's not easy.
And it's not easy. And today we're talking about a poll with a bunch of reputable names attached to it.
Oh, big names.
That has a question that is astonishing if you think that the way that questions are asked make a difference in the results you get.
Now, keep in mind, I think the rules here, and the rules are, this is the art side of polling. This is not necessarily the number crunching science side, but I guess the rule
Although
is...
some people would argue that there is a science side to developing questions, but I'll let you get away with that for now.
Okay, that will put as a footnote. And I think the rule of thumb here is probably you need sometimes to provide some context, but you need also to have clarity. So I think what jumped out at this question was an attempt to provide some context, but in the process, all things went nutty. Barb?
This is a big tease, isn't it?
Read the question.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Let me. Should I read the brand?
Yeah,
sure.
Well, no.
No, hold off on the brand.
Read the question.
So the question is,
Yeah.
Okay, and understand that this survey was not done over the phone, so it was done online, so people could read the question and read it over and over again, and when you hear this, you'll understand why I am saying this. The question is, some people say that the Iran nuclear deal is not perfect, and the Iranians are building up their nuclear capability secretly. But we should not rock the boat now and just let it all slide along. Others say if Iranians are not compliant, we have to call them out on it and push to renegotiate the deal with real verification. What would be your preferred course of action?
Reading again.
First, if you can get through that. But what a loaded question.
Well, I counted it just in the first choice. I counted 4 different pieces of information or things that you could ask a question about. The nuclear deal is not perfect. Well, that's one assumption, and people won't necessarily agree with that. The second one is Iranians are building up their nuclear capability secretly.
Which not only is not a fact in evidence, it has been refuted by everyone, including the Trump administration. Donald Trump, notwithstanding, he doesn't say that. His own administration certified that they're not building this up.
And we're still on the first choice, but we should not rock the boat. Okay, so this is another.
I like the
point.
nautical theme, though.
And just let it all slide along, which I don't even know what that means.
I know in class we talk about double-barreled questions, which basically if someone says yes or no, you're not sure which piece of it they're saying. This would qualify as a quadra-barreled question.
Well, no, because that's just the
first half.
choice that you have
We actually
to
haven't
agree
finished the
with.
question
I
yet.
haven't finished the question because that's just what some people say.
Gotcha.
Other people say 3 other things. Okay? Let's see, that the Iranians are not compliant, and so we have to call them out. We have to push to renegotiate the deal. and we need real verification.
So if you say yes or no to any part of this, you're not sure what the person is saying yes or no to. And although you're providing all kinds of context, you're not providing clarity.
And you're not
And-
providing context that's accurate or factual in some cases and is very much in dispute in other cases.
You know, we're kind of, playing around a little bit with this question, but this is a serious issue in public opinion research, because we always struggle when we have questions or we're asking questions on issues that perhaps people don't have the same information about. And they're very complex issues, and we debate back and forth. Well, what are the words, what's the information that we should be providing to the person that we're asking the question to? And we generally err on the side of allowing the person to take the question at face value, and we say what it means to you, which means for the information that you yourself have, how would you ask this?
Which really means that that again, we get back to crafting the question is incredibly important. And so you need to be as fair and down the middle as you possibly can if you're going to get a result that has at least some semblance of being something that you want to put it into the public. So I just want to push this ahead a little bit. This result, which showed that a majority of people supported
many people.
Kind of hard to say what they
6 in 10.
supported, but they said that this should be we should
renegotiate. We needed
right.
to throw out. We needed to throw out
and
the Iran
renegotiate.
deal.
That got widely reported as the American public as opposed to the Iran nuclear deal, which other polls showed the complete opposite.
And it's been asked a lot. It's been asked very simplistically, and I don't say simplistically as a bad thing, because when it comes to question wording, what's incredibly important is that we use language, meaning words that everyone can understand. And we know as pollsters that every single word we use may be interpreted in a certain way and may impact how a person answers the question. So we try very hard to have simple language, words that mean the same thing to most people, and to hopefully have the choices also be very clear.
And so this is really violating.
So
all
let me
that.
just take
Yeah.
the Q poll, the Quinnipiac poll, because they asked, do you support or oppose the nuclear deal with Iran? Now, they're not providing any context, so whatever information an individual has, they will bring to it to answer this question. And what they find is 22%, 1 in 5 Americans actually really don't have an opinion, which I think is an important finding because they feel they don't have enough information to have an opinion on it, unlike this other survey that we were talking about. 31% support it and 47% oppose it. Now, when asked by another organization, SSRS, another reputable poll that does sound science surveying, they asked whether the U.S. should or should not withdraw from the agreement. And 67% of Americans did not think we should withdraw. And the question was pretty, very simple. As you know, the United States and 5 other countries entered in an agreement with Iran aimed at preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
So Lee, let's cut to the chase. Who did this poll?
Well, the poll was done by a college out of Cambridge, I think, Harvard.
Havard? How's it pronounced?
Yeah, Harvard.
Havard or Harvard?
Yes,
we'll have to get a
Havard sounds
check
like
on it.
something else entirely.
It's a cheese, actually.
Yes. And the other, and it was done in partnership with the Harris poll, and I believe it was.
I believe that the Hill
was involved with it. So the question becomes, what's a consumer to do with all this? You got important topic. You have all kinds of questions. You have other questions that could even throw the data even dramatically in a different direction, like President Trump wants to. Now that's going to move numbers in a variety of ways just because they've heard the name President Trump.
President Trump, and both conservative, both supporters and
So it would split the deck right there. So the question becomes, what's a consumer to do with all this? And I think one of the key things, aside from because of transparency, looking at the question wording and see if it passes, the so-called smell test, is to look at who did this poll, who actually did it. And the poll was conducted, my understanding is, by Mark Penn, who's a well-known political pollster and strategist, very much involved in the Clinton campaigns up until the most recent one. And so then the question becomes to me, just looking at this, and I don't have the answer, is this in any way a kind of question that might enter into the political marketplace for some kind of strategy beyond just providing information to the public?
Yeah, I want to take it one little step further. Mark Penn's firm bought the Harris Poll name and the Harris Poll from Nielsen. Nielsen, a publicly traded company. The Harris Poll had very good respect. It's been in the business a long time. Mark Penn is a political consultant. His firm is a political consulting firm. They bought the Harris Poll. So it's not the Harris poll anymore in Mark Penn. It is Mark Penn's firm that did this poll with Harvard.
Putting the brand on.
And so the Harris imprimatur makes it look like it's maybe something that it's not. There's nothing in here that suggests that this is being paid for by anybody. There's no disclosure of that. It's a monthly huge poll they do. This one runs 250 pages. Have fun doing that one online. I don't know how anybody stayed awake to do it. But I think it's important to note that when you talk about looking at who does the poll, I see, oh, Harris poll. Okay, sure. But that's not the Harris poll anymore necessarily. Maybe, but it may not be, because now it's owned by a political consulting firm, a guy who has largely worked for Democrats, but also worked for Menachem Begin, the Conservative Party, or the Likud party in Israel a long time ago, and has worked for a number of issues and a number of more conservative causes in the more recent past. So
this is the kind of things we're going to be looking at and sort of calling to
and it's a good point.
attention.
It is a monthly poll, so we will be following. Again, it is an online poll as well, so we have other questions about that beyond the question
For
wording.
another day, perhaps.
So today we also have two very special guests with us. Bob Bellafiore from Stanhope Partners, a communications and strategy company. But you are also a journalist. You worked for the Business Council of New York, worked for former New York Governor George Pataki. You are president of the State University of New York Charter Schools Institute, as well as a SUNY trustee.
We've only got 10 minutes here.
Well, I was just thinking, though, that it just doesn't seem like he can actually hold a job. So,
those are just the ones I got fired from.
But in any case, you are sought after for your insights in government, politics, and communications. And we have also Steve Greenberg from Greenberg Public Relations. And you have 30 years of experience also as campaign manager, communications director, a senior advisor for numerous local and statewide political campaigns. You've worked in the New York Assembly for over a decade. You were actually communications director for an almost governor or candidate.
Not quite.
Carl McCall, who is also the New York State Controller. And I need to actually add this too, that you are function as a spokesperson for another college polling organization a little bit farther upstate, Siena College Poll. So neither of you are strangers to this kind of political chatter on all sorts of media platforms. We are very familiar with your bantering, so we are very happy to have you here. It's a treat to have you on campus. I might add you are going to be you're going to be speaking to Lee's class later, as addition to our listeners. So
we actually forced them into this room and put them in front of the microphones. They didn't really know this was part of the gig nowadays.
Yeah, but now it is, and so.
Well, Steve and I were built for radio.
We do polls here at Marist College, most of them public.
You do?
We do.
Really?
I know that comes to a surprise to you. But you guys use polling in a very, very different manner. You use them in campaigns. You also use them for organizations. Can you kind of give us a behind the scenes of what that's like?
Well, there's one major difference between how Marist and Siena use polls and what Steve and I like to use polls for clients, which is you like to tell the public what the public thinks. And we like to do polling so our clients are informed about what the public thinks. And what we find in a poll may never be disclosed through the media. like Marist and Siena and other polling outfits do, because you do it for external information. I like to use it as a diagnostic tool, so that
what does that exactly mean?
So
if you have a client who's
if
company X,
if I'm working on an issue like education reform, which I work on a lot, we want to figure out where the public is on, or specific parts of the public on an issue like education reform, school choice, vouchers, things like that, so that we can understand what the pressures are on elected officials on those issues, because elected officials do the same kind of polling, and we want to know, are we in a good position, or are we in a bad position?
Is this kind of like lobbying?
Well, people will use it it's really for messaging and tactical decisions.
So what's the fundamental difference though between, because as a political reporter, I always was speaking to guys like you about the internal polls, what the internal polls show, and to some degree, that's what we're talking about here, is an internal poll, whether it's for an issue or a candidate, and the polls like Siena or Marist or whoever. What's the difference? Did you ever look at an internal poll and then see the public poll and go, wow, somebody's screwed up here?
No, I would look at an internal poll and see a public poll and go, this public poll screwed up here. Because the internal polling, I find, is generally better, because what they really want to know is they want to know the reality. You will see public polls, Steve and I kvetch about this all the time, I mostly do the kvetching, is that they ask the public about its impressions about issues, regardless of whether they know anything about them. So essentially, you're polling on the news coverage of issues. So for me, it's kind of circular. For a campaign, it's like you'll never see what the poll question is, but you'll hear the polling results in the messaging that a candidate puts out.
Okay, I think he threw down the gauntlet, Steve.
Well, look, I think there's a lot of things that have been thrown out here first. I think the public polling serves an important public service, and I think Barbara, you and certainly Lee, deserve credit, because Marist was the first, essentially, to do this on a big-time basis.
We're that old.
You are. But that's evolved. And the public polling is not aiming at finding out what is the right message for candidate X or candidate Y. That's candidate X and candidate Y do their own internal polling, and they get that. And I agree with Bob completely. I mean, a private poll is done for a very different purpose. You're doing it to help you craft your message, to help you understand what sells better, what vulnerabilities you have. So you might do, as a candidate, you might do a poll where you beat yourself up in that poll, or you beat up your own candidate.
And does that mean you're asking leading questions?
Like, absolutely.
Is this guy, is my candidate, do you think he's a fool?
If you knew candidate X had done blah, 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 would that make you more likely or less likely to vote for him or her? So you wouldn't ask that in a Marist poll or a Siena poll, because that is essentially, maybe not exactly, but pretty damn close to a push poll question.
Yeah, it's a leading question. Yeah.
But as a campaign, you want to do that. So the other thing you do in a campaign poll, for example, is you'll ask the horse race question, candidate X versus candidate Y. You'll ask that 3, 4, 5 times in the course of a poll.
Oh, in the same survey.
Absolutely. You'll ask it first, right up at the beginning, like you do in your polls when you're doing a candidate horse race poll. You'll ask that right up front. But then what you'll do in the campaign is, what if I told you this good stuff about candidate A? Now that I've told you that, what do you think? Now let me tell you some good stuff about candidate B. What do you think? Some bad stuff about them. You might do 3, 4, 5 horse races. Then, and Barbara, you know this far better than I do, then the polling gurus, the statisticians of the world, the people who understand how to do this, can do their regression analysis and all these other analyses,
all the dirty words,
and find which messages moved people in a positive way more or less. Now, Marist and Siena aren't doing that, but campaigns do that. Candidates, but also organizations and entities that are, as Bob said, doing public messaging.
Right, and not only what messages affect people in a certain way, but what people are affected by what messages. Because a campaign is a math problem, right? You have to get 50% plus 1, and in a campaign you want to see, well, this message will keep my opponent's people home, and this message will help keep enough of my people out to outnumber the number of the other person's people who come
Are
out.
the waves the polls done any different though? Because that's one of the things I guess I never asked as a reporter was when I was talking to you and you were talking to me about an internal poll, I never said, well, how did you do the internal poll? Are they essentially done the same way? I mean, you might be better at because you've worked on both sides of this.
It really depends, because there are really good public pollsters and less good public pollsters. Certainly Marist and Siena, I would put in the very good public pollsters. Very transparent. They tell you their methodology, how they do it. There are very good private pollsters on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, those who do both sides, and there are less good private pollsters. I mean, there was one pollster who used to be a public pollster, and you did a lot of private work, and I won't mention any names, but the word on the street was, tell him what you want him to find, and he'll find that in a poll for you. Well, nobody wants that. I mean, look.
And certainly as public researchers, that's the farthest thing from what we actually do.
And I do want to take one issue with one thing you said, Bob. Just one. Just one.
I failed.
And that is that public pollsters have no bent to try and push it to candidate A or candidate B. They have no desire to falsely report, to make fake news, because a pollster gets judged on one thing, and that is the day after Election Day, did the pollster get it right or get it wrong? Most times, Marist gets it right. Most times, Siena gets it right. Occasionally, we've gotten it wrong. But the only desire a public pollster has is to be accurate. So
a public pollster has a prime motivation to get press and build reputation and raise money.
But you can only do it if you're accurate. If you're a lousy poll, it's not going to work.
On head-to-head races, I think you make an excellent point about that. But there are a lot of times when issues are polled where that's where you're just measuring what people have heard about it. I want to get to one other point, so we can agree to disagree on that until our hair grows back. Jay, when you and I would talk in like 1998, when I was on Senator D'Amato's campaign, and we would talk about polling, and neither public polls or private political polls get anywhere near the truth. Right? They just measure what people know and what they think. In a political campaign,
but that's the purpose.
We're going to start ganging up on you.
It's the truth of what the public believes. It's not necessarily the
but let
truth.
him finish, because you're talking about this is a very specific race that
I'm going to raise what I think is a fascinating point about what the polling showed.
Schumer-D'Amato race.
It's the Schumer-D'Amato race. It was 1998,
right?
Biggest Senate race in the country that year. Yeah. The D'Amato polling showed that people thought that based on what the D'Amato campaign said about Chuck Schumer's attendance record, he didn't go to work. Now, anybody who knows Chuck Schumer knows that he wakes up at 6 and calls his staff and says, what's in the paper, what's going on, and goes to bed at 2 in the morning and calls the same staff and says, what's going to be in the paper tomorrow. He is the hardest working man in show, right? The most dangerous space in Washington is between Chuck Schumer and the TV camera.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. The Schumer polling on D'Amato said that people were tired of him. He had been there too long. And you remember this from covering all these ads and seeing these races. What is the single most important influential factor in being in the U.S. Senate? Seniority.
Yeah.
So it was reality turned on its head.
In both cases.
In both cases. Yeah. D'Amato was making hay with saying that Chuck Schumer had a lousy voting record, such they were interviewing people outside the Yankees World Series game in 98 saying, I'm not voting for Schumer. He don't go to work. Are you crazy? And D'Amato was getting hit for being there too long in a place where the most important thing is seniority. So campaign polls and what you see reflected in the messaging that comes out of those polls is what they think people will believe, and then they accentuate what people will believe.
I thought something you said earlier was really interesting too, and the last segment we talked about a poll that was out recently, some really big, apparently reputable names that asked a question about the Iran nuclear deal and whether it was a good deal or a bad deal, and the question that we focused on was so absurdly neutral that
And,
anybody
convoluted. It was actually hard to even.
But anybody
hear
could
out
see
loud.
that this was, in your words, a push-pull kind of thing, and this was done in the guise of a neutral poll. You mentioned that what public polls are doing is not really capturing what people know about something, but what they have, their knowledge of it. Let me rephrase that. You said not what they think of it, but what they know of it, which in many cases is very little.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put yourself in the shoes of something that you haven't been, that none of us have really been, which is a consumer of a poll without a lot of knowledge about it. Somebody who's just watching TV or reading the web or whatever and seeing a poll. What do you say to them when they see numbers from a poll? Can they do to inoculate themselves against that kind of bias towards a poll that is basically saying, well, most people don't know very much about this issue, which in the end of the day is largely what we see in public polls, I think.
Well, I'll
Either
go
of
fast.
you.
Yeah, Steve, you go. Then I'll disagree.
I was just going to say, I mean, look, consumers have to educate themselves no matter what it is. I mean, if they want to know if there's bias in the poll, they're going to have to do some research on who did the poll. Just like if they want to know if there's bias in the news that they're watching, they need to do a little research and figure out, is there bias on Fox News or on MSNBC? I would argue, yeah, there is on both. And the consumer has to figure out how much, do I want to weigh that?
And I'll weigh in on the public polling too. Is that I don't like to blame the person who's taking the poll and saying that, well, they don't have really enough information to weigh in on this issue. I think that all of us have a way of gathering information, and what we're measuring, in a sense, are opinions. I know your goal when working for companies and candidates, and perhaps also companies who are looking to delve into particular issues and measure what people think. You may be taking a deeper dive. We may be somewhat more superficial in the public realm, but I think we are really measuring opinions. And if we aren't, and if we don't, I don't think it's the public's fault. I think it's the pollster's fault, and that we're not really putting a question together which gets at what the person understands. And if people do not have a lot of information, very often that's a big deal.
That's
news.
You can blame the media for that.
And that's news in of itself. Up until a month ago, on the Constitutional Convention vote that's taking place next week in New York State, 50% of people had never heard a word about it. I think it's still relevant to ask them, how do you feel about it? Are you going to vote yes or no? Because it is on the ballot.
But Bob, that's your point, is that they actually don't know anything about it. So they're saying yes, it should be on the ballot, or no, but they actually don't know anything about it.
There's like 8 questions flowing. First, I want to address something that Barbara said. Don't feel bad. Fill in the blank. We are sitting in the headquarters of the Marist Institute for Public what?
Opinion.
Right. So we're not trying to measure reality. You're measuring opinion.
But
right?
the opinion is reality. It is the reality of how people feel.
He's a philosophy major.
No, I'm.
Let him finish.
I can't believe this. I'm not going to actually have to agree with Steve. Oh my goodness. This is a first.
No.
Let Bob finish, because
our people, we get to go to confession.
Go ahead.
So what does somebody do sitting in their Barco lounger consuming all this information, right? They're looking at their phone, they're getting the stuff on TV, they hear about a poll. Well, they can do one of 2 things. One of 3 things, really. We may end up with 6 by the time this is over. But one is
we won't commit you
They
to
can
that.
decide, let this thing just wave over me and I'll just wash over me and I'll just do whatever I'm going to do, and if it hits me, it'll hit me. Or 2, they could say, I need to know more about what's in this poll. What's the sample size? What was the question? How was it weighted? How was it asked? When was it done? Who did they ask? All that other stuff that, Jay, you as a reporter would know to ask, right? I was a reporter would know to ask. Steve and Barbara, you as pollsters would care about that stuff on the front end. Or they can do what I do, which is I put on a ball game.
Right, because nobody who's not the people you just mentioned are going to care about any of that.
I'm not
Right?
sure I agree with that. I mean, I'll use a real-world example. My brother-in-law has nothing to do with politics. He votes every year. That's about it. He reads the newspaper. He watches TV. He follows it, but he's not involved in the political world at all. But, I mean, I'll get together with him, and he'll say, hey, I saw that poll in Newsday the other day that said blah, blah, blah. I think the reaction of most people when they hear a public poll reported at them is, if they agree with the findings, they go, "Yeah, damn right. That's what I believe. I'm glad that my fellow New Yorkers or Americans agree with that." Or they're like, that's a lousy poll. That's not what I agree with. Everybody I know feels that, this is the case, not the other way. So I think people do it in terms of how it affects them. Either they like it or they don't, based on the findings.
Well, one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with now isn't polling bias, but confirmation bias, which is the American pastime now. Forget football and baseball. The American pastime is confirmation bias. I'm going to read stuff that backs up what I already think. I'm going to disregard things I already don't think. When I talked to a group in Albany at a public library, and I asked them to raise their hands. How many people get their news from Fox? Like everybody's hands have nailed to the table. How many people get their news from CNN? A couple of hands went up. How many people listen to public radio? It was like I was giving out a car. They always
a Subaru if it was public radio.
Yeah, right. So,
and are you saying that's just demographic?
Well, but what I'm saying is, I think people consume the news that most fits what they think. I don't think the general public is interested in being challenged, in having their conceptions, individuals having their conceptions or their ideologies or their thoughts pushed or being exposed to what other people think. One, maybe it's laziness. Maybe they just don't have time. People have got a million things going on. It's the rice is boiling over. I don't have time to listen to this anymore or read this journal.
But there used to be, in a different time, fewer choices. So your choice was, when we were growing up, it's either Walter Cronkite or Huntley and Brinkley or Peter Jennings
Howard
or
K. Smith.
Howard K. Smith. I couldn't remember ABC.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay,
up.
Barbara. But I mean,
Thanks.
so you had you had far fewer choices, and you were deciding which of these three network newses you thought was best for you, or you liked the person the best. Now we have so many different choices that no matter what your ideology, your ethnicity, your beliefs, your whatever are, you can find a news outlet that will cater to you. And I agree with Bob completely. I mean, this echo chamber that people only want to hear news that verifies what they believe is a real societal problem.
Now, three of us in this room used to work in the news business. What's happened, though, is that even the information you're getting has been merged with entertainment, right? What I like to say is that People Magazine has won. I give up.
Well, no, I think Facebook and Google and Twitter have won.
Yeah, but people.
But they won.
Barbara,
They won later. His point, I think, is well taken. Is like, I would say Entertainment Tonight won.
People Magazine was first,
right? People,
and USA Today.
But in every medium, even before social mediums, the battle was lost 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
everything was entertainment first, from the Kardashians on down. Everything is entertainment first. And then the social platforms have come in, and they haven't directed anything. They just have algorithms that feed you what you want. Well, we want Kardashian, and that's what we get. And that's what we deserve.
We have a reality TV president.
We could end the segment right there, because that pretty much answers everything.
Well, which is, Steve, you've heard me.
Notice Bob did not want to give Steve the last word.
No.
He's got a good point here.
But he's a natural, logical, if not absurdist, extension of everywhere this country's been going for 40 years. When it started with people getting their news from snippets from USA Today and People Magazine and Us Magazine to Entertainment Tonight, to now we care about what Jimmy Kimmel says about healthcare. So now we're taking
more than anybody else.
Well, guys, hang on. Now you're. I think you're also now confusing, celebrity with news. And granted,
we're confused.
They're the same thing.
Yeah.
You have a celebrity
conflated.
as the president. It's the same thing now.
Well, I still think
The non-journalist here is gonna stand up for our old profession.
No,
Do it.
No, it's not about journalism or not journalism. I think that yes, I completely understand the concept of confirmation bias. I understand the echo chamber. It's really hard. And I think there are a lot of people that are really struggling to work through some of that as well. And I don't think it's an accident that, NPR has 7 of the top 10 podcasts, in the country. I don't think it's an accident then when you talk to people who are really interested in news that they do have a trusted news source. So I think the problems.
Be careful where you're
also,
going with this now. You're touching a line that's the West Virginia border.
In terms of
about how people who care about news are the ones who listen to NPR, and what about the people who don't care about news?
Oh no, I wasn't saying that.
Okay.
I was using NPR as an example for the podcasts that they have. I wasn't suggesting that only people who care about news listen to NPR, and that's a good point. And I'm glad you've called me on it, because the point is that many people have a trusted news source, and that may be Fox, that may be CNN, and you're talking about the echo chamber. But there's also those individuals are also looking at other news sources, and they're being bombarded by other news sources, whether they trust them as much or not.
We got to let these guys get to class. Right?
That never stopped us before.
Call us when we have class.
Well, that's a different kind of class. But Bob and Steve are here to both talk to us on Poll Hub here, which is great, but also to talk to students. And I think that students would have gained a lot from this. I was up about 8 weeks ago, I did a class. And this class in particular, they are so conscious. These kids at this age are so conscious of the bias in news, of the self-selection of sources. I think you're going to find it really fascinating to talk exactly what we just talked about with them. They're far more responsive. I have way more hope. Having talked to them and taught them, I didn't teach them, they taught me. I have way more hope than I would have listening to the four of us.
That's good to know.
About the future.
I like that.
Yeah, all right. So
Enjoyed it very much.
Bob Belfiore, thanks for coming in. Stephen Gradeberg, have a great time in class. And we
always did.
And we'll be back right after this.
So 2 weeks ago, we had a special guest, Ray Robinson, who was my father-in-law, talking about racial discrimination in baseball, 96 years old. And unfortunately, he did pass away in this since that point in time. So that's obviously very sad for all of us. However, it's really, really nice that we have him on tape on a topic that was very important for him to have done so close to the time when he passed away. So anyway, so the good news is there's an upside to that. If we can find one,
we will miss Ray. So that is Poll Hub, which is produced by the Maris Poll, and thanks to our executive producer Mary Griffith, who makes it all happen.
You can find us on social media on Facebook and on Instagram, Snapchat, basically any place that you are, we are. And make sure that you hit the subscribe button when you're listening to us. That also allows you to go back and listen to the episode where Ray was on and listen to him talking about it. It's a great show. Just a couple of weeks back, a couple episodes back. Give yourself a listen and check in on some great sports memorabilia history, and also some very current stuff too that he talked about, which was very cool. Anyway, that's it for Poll Hub. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here next time.